Okay. All right.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another conversation on Character Day 2016. You can follow along and add questions or comments at hashtag Character Day 2016. And we'll be having these conversations throughout the day, every half an hour. We've already had several really great conversations with people all over the world. Today, right now, we're about to talk to Ayorkor Korsah, who is in Ghana at this very moment. It's only 3:30 in the afternoon, so she has a reasonable time frame, which is nice. And she is a senior lecturer in computer sciences and robotics, and the department head at Ashesi University in Ghana, and is involved in a lot of conversations around computer sciences and robotics in Ghana and Africa as a whole. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So I would love to start out by talking a little bit about how you came to computer sciences and robotics specifically. It's a very interesting field, and something that I imagine, I think that, you know, a lot of young women are not necessarily encouraged in that direction. I know the percentages are not where we want them to be as far as women being involved in that field. And can you talk a little bit about where your first desire to be in this world and how you found yourself where you are?
Okay. Well, when I was a child, you know, in primary school and secondary school, I loved math and science, you know, and so when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be, someone told me that, well, if you like math and science, then you should probably be an engineer. And so I decided, okay, I was going to be some kind of engineer, but figuring out what kind of engineer was a long journey. In college, I took my first, all engineering majors or pre-majors had to take a programming course. And I'd never programmed before, but when I took it, I loved it. I just found it really cool that you could basically reprogram the computer to do what you wanted it to do rather than whatever it was doing by default. And it was very, very fascinating. And so that's kind of how I got into computer science. But I really loved building things, and I loved the idea of technology working in the physical world. And so when I went to a talk about robotics once, and I was just blown away, I said, you know, wow, this is engineering and computer science combined. You're programming something, not only is it making the computer do what you want, but it's actually acting and having an effect in the physical world. So I just found it really exciting. And that's where it started.
Cool. And you ended up in the United States at some point for part of your schooling?
Yes, all of my higher education was in the United States.
And what brought you here? And was your intention, you're now back in Ghana, obviously, was your intention always to come to school here and return back to Ghana with what you had learned?
My intention was actually, I never really had the intention to study in the US. That was just sort of a series of events that made that happen. A friend of mine broached the idea, and then, you know, I met various people, and so I ended up in the US. But my intention was always to come back. At least to come back to Africa, but also Ghana was an option in there. Yeah.
And what did you, and were you specifically interested in coming back as an educator? How did that happen? And what was your excitement about being an educator?
Mm-hmm. I've always been really passionate about education. I mean, the importance or the value of education. And I think part of it is, you know, just things you learn in the family, at home. You know, my parents always talked about how important education was. You know, faith, religion, all emphasized the importance of education. So I've always really believed in education. At some point, I considered being a teacher. You know, in the journey of trying to figure out what I wanted to be, this passion of both science and technology and education kept coming to the fore. I never really planned to be in higher education, but it was a professor of mine in college who one day just asked me, hey, have you ever considered doing a PhD? And I'd never considered it, but he planted the seed. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed exciting to actually be involved in higher education and research. And so that's where that happened.
How are robotics and computer sciences a burgeoning interest or industry in Ghana? Is that something that is sort of burbling there?
Definitely computer science or the software development industry is growing very rapidly. Robotics, we don't really have much of a robot or any, we don't have a robotics industry in Ghana yet. So robotics mostly in Ghana plays out in the realm of outreach and education. So for example, over the past few years, there've been some organizations who've been actively helping promote the establishment of robotics clubs in high schools, and to basically use that as a tool to get students more excited about science and technology. And so then, then at university, there are no universities in Ghana that actually have robotics as a major, but there are a few that offer robotics as sort of an elective course in computer science or in engineering, just as a way of really broadening students' perspectives and expanding their vision of what they can do with their knowledge and skills in computer science and engineering. So in Ghana at the moment, robotics is mostly in the realm of education. There are some industries that use automation and use robotics, but these tend not to be robots developed in Ghana, so they're importing industrial robots from other countries and are running them and maintaining them, but no one's really developing industrial robots in Ghana.
It sounds like you, with the work you're describing, and also having founded the African Robotics Network, that your interest goes beyond just being a university educator and developing curriculum. You have sort of a mission with the work that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about where you see the importance of communicating these opportunities to people and encouraging these conversations?
I see, to me, the key thing is the whole idea of empowerment. When we talk about, often people talk about development, what does it really take for a community to develop? It's when the members of that community are really able and have the opportunity to contribute to the solution of problems that they face and the solution of problems that other people face. So for me, one thing that is really, really important to me is to see young people in Africa be empowered to be creators and problem solvers, right? So not just using technology or solutions that have been developed elsewhere, but actually being able to contribute to that process. To me, that is the key of development. And so in everything I do, what I would really like, is to be able to see these young people emerge as active participants in the world of creation and problem solving in a variety of domains, particularly in technology, just because I'm really interested in technology.
But it's interesting though, because what you touched on a couple of the sort of primary character traits that we've been talking about through these several conversations in Character Day, and you're almost saying that in some ways, like, the physical and technological challenges of robotics and computer sciences are a way to train the mind, or to train or inspire people beyond the field itself.
Exactly. And also, to give them the tools and the experience with being able to see a problem that seems completely intractable, right? And say that, look, I have a process, I have a set of tools that I can use to approach this problem. And through that, actually make my world, our community a better place, right? So to give people the tools and the, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but sort of the belief, the confidence that they can actually contribute to solving problems, and not have people feel helpless that, I need to sit and wait for somebody from somewhere to come and solve the problems that are around me.
Now, I'm guessing, I'm curious if I know that in the US, the role models for young girls of women who are involved in technology and things like computer sciences and robotics are small, and that women who end up in those positions feel a responsibility to expand that conversation to young girls everywhere. Is the situation similar in Africa? Do you feel like you've been talking about, empowering people to feel like they can tackle these problems. Do you feel a special responsibility to communicate that to girls in Africa? Is there that same kind of disconnect in Africa as we see in the US?
Definitely in Ghana, I can't necessarily speak to all parts of Africa, but the areas where I am familiar with, there is definitely a strong sort of discrepancy between the number of young women and the number of young men who go into these technical fields. You see lots of women in medicine, for example, and those kinds of the medical sciences, but you don't see a lot of women in engineering and computer science. And so I do feel that it's important to encourage more women and girls to really consider this area. And so even as, part of our work here at the university, one of the things at least in my department, we're interested in understanding is what are some of the factors that influence all students, but particularly girls, in deciding, whether or not to pursue a computer science major or engineering major. And one of the things we've learned is that coming into college, not many students actually have a good understanding of, say, what computer science even is and what they can do with it. And so the people who tend to start out saying, hey, I want to major in computer science, tend to be people who, they just, oh, I like computers, I've played a lot of video games in high school, or I've done this, so maybe I'll study computer science, right? And that tends to be more boys because for some reason, they tend to have more exposure, they tend to be gaming more, etc. And of course, at some point, they realize that computer science isn't about just video games and liking computers, but by then they're already invested, which is good. Whereas many of the young women entering, freshman year, they can practically see what, say, the business administration major is about, but they don't really know what they're going to do with a computer science major. And so we have to do more education, more outreach to help young women really understand the range of career opportunities that are available to them, and help them understand also what you can do with it, the impact you can have with these fields. Because I think sometimes that's not always obvious.
One of the things I did some work with Google in their they have a Google Africa division, and we were interviewing some folks from all over Africa that had come to one of their conferences here. And one of the things that they were talking about that came up a lot is just a sense of like an untapped resource, that there's this amazing, a lot of really bright people and a lot of resources of people who are ready to join this field, but some of the infrastructure isn't there, or some of the encouragement isn't there. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little bit, about what the efforts are to bridge that gap between what sounds like, from what I've heard, is an enormous resource, and the ability to match that resource to, I guess, other resources, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a number of things that can be done, are being done. One thing that we do at Ashesi is every summer, we run what we call the Ashesi Innovation Experience, which is a program for high school students, where we actually bring them to the campus and we give them a really intensive sort of 2-week experience where they're learning about design thinking and leadership and robotics and engineering and entrepreneurship, and really getting them involved in hands-on activities and having them create things. So for example, this past summer, some students were programming robots for a miniature factory. Some students were developing a smart home using, cardboard boxes and sensors and the Arduino kits. And so they go away with a great sense of empowerment. They all of a sudden, they know how to do amazing things that they couldn't dream that they could do before that. But then also, they really have a sense of what these careers might be about. What would it be like to be an engineer? What would it be like to be in computer science? And we hope that experiences like this really help open the world of opportunity to people. Like in Ghana, we have this thing where for senior high school, students have to specialize. So for example, you might focus on specialize in science or general arts or languages, etc. But, so they're making this decision when they're like 15 years old or 14 years old, and they don't have necessarily a lot of information. And so they sort of are going with the standard things. Okay, if I think I'm going to be good in science, then I want to be a doctor. Otherwise, I want to be a lawyer. Otherwise, and there's so many options that they're not even considering. And so we need to spend more time with younger students, really opening them up to the world of opportunity that is out there, and helping them figure out what they really love, what they're passionate about, where their skills lie, so that they know where, what directions they want to go in.
Do you in Ghana, aside from yourself, is there, and you said there's like a burgeoning software development industry in Ghana, is there a lot of linkage happening in that industry with young people aside from the university setting? Do you see that it being like kind of a sense of urgency or interest in furthering that that bond?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a number of programs, at least a few that I know of. For example, there's a software company, I guess you could say they're sort of a maturing startup. They're probably about, say, 7 or so years old now. They were actually started by a couple of Ashesi alum. And one of the things they do is, as part of their corporate social responsibility, every summer they run a program for teachers in high school who teach information technology, as a way of helping them improve their skills and giving them ideas about curriculum, with the hope, and they do sort of entire regions at a time, where they invite say 40 students 40 teachers at a time from various regions to give them this extra training. I know of a couple of programs which are, like a programming camps for girls, other programs for young people. So I think there are a number of sort of pockets of people doing various things, not necessarily in a coordinated way, but there are at least several organizations that are looking at this issue of how can we inspire and train our young people.
It's interesting because when you mentioned that about programming camp for girls, I made a documentary film about a rock and roll camp for girls, and it reminds me that it's interesting because they were very much about, like, they form bands, they write songs and stuff, but the music was only an excuse to, like, sort of get girls together, get them feeling like they could accomplish this thing that a lot of them think that are, is the dominion of boys, etc. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, we talked about this a little bit before in with programming and robotics, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how something like that seems like robotics seems really removed in a way from a career choice. It sounds like there's not a big robotics industry, but what is it that, like, a young person who has engaged in robotics, and maybe robotics as a field isn't ready for them yet, but what are they going to do if they feel that sense of accomplishment? What does it lead to?
Well, so I mean, although robotics as a field doesn't really exist as an industry or as a career choice per se in Ghana at the moment, but I mean, robotics is interdisciplinary, right? And it's made up of component disciplines that are very much alive and well in Ghana. So by participating in robotics, you're learning a little bit about mechanical engineering. There are many, many mechanical engineering problems in Ghana. You're learning a little bit about electrical engineering. You're learning about computer science and programming. You're learning about sensing and being able to interface with the physical world. And there are many, many applications here of being able to sense the environment and do something based on that environment. And I think you're learning about problem solving in general, how to debug solutions, and the whole idea of integration, being able to integrate various areas of knowledge, being able to integrate software and hardware, being able to integrate with the physical world. All of those are skills that are very, very relevant to the professions and the problems available to students.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us today from Ghana. This has been really fascinating. And before we go, is there anything you want to tell people about your work and where they can go to see more or be a part of what you're doing?
Well, I think a good starting point for Ashesi is just the Ashesi website, www.ashesi.edu.gh. And what Ashesi is trying to do in terms of really empower a new generation of young people who are going to change Africa, right? Then there's the African Robotics Network, roboticsafrica.org, and then yeah, I think those are two good starting points.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.